short, but you know, whoever I'm interviewing, I like to give them a particular nickname. So today's nickname was, I did enough due diligence to kind of figure out the variable of her keywords. And I think the best nickname for her is going to be the suitability boss. And I think you know why I'm calling you that, right? So I want you to tell the audience a little bit more about you and what would you like to talk about today?
Well, hey there. I am a business futurist just like you. And I'm surprised you didn't say trailblazer because we both, like talking about hiking and getting out in nature. I would grew up on a small farm in Kentucky, and growing up in nature, you learn about growth cycles, you learn about diversity of crops, you learn about planting in different phases. There's no waste in nature. You use the waste from one thing, like your horses, to, help other things grow and fertilize them in the garden. And so all of this exposure that I had as a kid, and my parents were elementary school teachers, which made it even more so an active learning of things around me and appreciation whenever I got into business, and I've been everything from CEO of small companies to innovation or sustainability leaders of large organizations, billion-dollar organizations. And what is the common theme across all of them is that all the lessons we need to know to solve the business crisis today, they come from nature. So if we'll just look around and listen, then we can pick up the things that need to be done straight away.
Very cool, very cool. I think on your website there was a particular video, and I think it was a particular thing that you said that resonated with me. And you said, like most companies are stuck in the 1960s, and that you want to deliver the diversity code. So I want to kind of just start off with that. Like what is, and that's one of the premier things that you have on your website as far as like step one. So let's talk about that. What does diversity code really mean in your terminology, and how does that help you with your clients?
Yeah, I think understanding that we're each made of energy and we're energized by different things and getting people that think differently. What I mean by companies are stuck in the 1960s, shame on you if you are not diverse by now with ethnicity, with gender, with preferences. Like you're already way behind the times. That is table stakes. So for me, that's the first step that organizations, can work on with diversity. But if we're going to up level that, we need to be thinking diversely. And that includes how we think as well as how machine technologies think. So let me give you an example real quick. Going back to that growth curve we talked about, where the bottom of the curve is future forward, generative. And those people that are always thinking about new ideas, your Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they're always out into the future. And so they're at the beginning. The people in the middle are more like, let's get it done. Let's scale it. Is this idea going to work? How do we make it happen? And a lot of times they're middle managers. They're put in places where they are connecting the big idea people to the risk averse people that are stabilizing and refining in quality. So 90% of Purdue engineers, give or take, are at the top of the curve because they're really good at using frames of reference that already exist. Now, what I mean by, modernize your diversity is you need all different people along the curve. If everybody is the Steve Jobs, then who's going to take care of the books and find the risk? And then likewise, if you're an investments company and you're trying to avoid risk, you don't want people that are constantly looking for, new ways to explore and take more risk. So it's about balance and technology. You can graph that right on that same curve. You've got future forward, like generative AI. You've got data management where you're taking in, inputs and then you're putting it in meaningful context, that people can understand. And at the top of the curve, you have things that are refining, like automation that streamline and reduce errors. So that's what I'm talking about with diversity and, get with the times, people. Let's get beyond. If you're not already diverse, then shame on you, get there, as far as how we look, and how we feel. But I'm talking about how you think differently. That's really important.
What I think is a hell of a segue, kind of going into like the phase two of that, right? I mean, the key word would have been modern innovation. And I think that can go into multiple different directions, but I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit in your last statement. So like just dive into your meaning of that, and how does a executive comprehend that and then utilize that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to think about every person's strengths. We're energized when we're doing what we love. When you're in flow and you forget to eat, or you kind of forget what time it is, and you look up and you're like, oh, dang, like I've been doing this the whole time. So I call it the triple A framework just for ease of remembering it. But executives can get their minds wrapped around it if they think of assess, what is each person's happy place, including their own. I mean, you've got a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to your podcast. What is their happy place? So assess what that is and then align it to the job at hand. And that's where you go back to getting the right seats, on the bus and getting the right people in those seats. So align it and then adapt. This is not linear business anymore. It's more like chaos theory, because one social media post, something is going to go wrong, and you can't always be prepared for everything, but you can be prepared to adapt as change happens. So
Mhm.
assess, align, adapt. That's your AAA tool.
Very cool. So last but not least is obviously the fallout from all these different things. I mean, a lot of people, they'll get completely consumed by what we're talking about. They'll dive head first. Some people are kind of like, I don't really want to touch it. But the people that you're saying on the top of the curve, they're consumed by this. And then that
Mhm.
leads to burnout. So your third topic is beating burnout. Like, what does that mean besides like the layman definition or the Webster's definition of that term?
Yeah, we all go back to energy. And when I say we all, I mean the plants, the animals, human beings, and organizations. Organizations are living organisms. And the ones that don't jump onto the next curve, that don't propagate for the next big idea, like Blockbuster, Kodak, Compaq, they cease to live,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's really important that we think about this is how our cycle is. And if we know what energizes us, then we can avoid burnout. Burnout comes from, like, let's say you put somebody like us, we naturally live in the future. We're naturally thinking about this is going to lead to that. It's even hard to be present because we're thinking about what's next all the time. And yet, how people burn out is if we were put in a role that said, you cannot use creativity. You cannot vary from this. Just do the same thing every day, or, specialize in finding risk all day long, every day. We would burn out. And so you burn out when you are put in a place. And likewise, you see whiplash happen, like in a lot of tech companies or really fast moving companies, when you take people at the top of the curve and you're like, innovate, go faster with all this change, instead of riding the wave, which would be a good idea for us. Like we would be like, yeah, bring it. They would feel buried or drowned by the same wave. And so it's really important to avoid burnout. You got to know which end of the curve you're on and then align your role to that as much as possible.
So, I mean, starting off with those three things, I really wanted to kind of start off with like the impactful to kind of set the tone, but really and truly who you are and what you're doing is all really stemming from, I think you made it in a video, you said nature is a badass, right? And the first title of one of your books was Trust Your Animal Instinct. And then there was a video with you in Costa Rica and you were zooming in on a random snake on a tree branch. And then, you loved like your puppies. And I think it was more so like your son's dog.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
have this infusion with animals. So I
I
want you to kind
do.
of talk about like how does that animal instinct then play into the nature, and how does that then take the three things that we talked about originally and make those more impactful to get the results that you're looking for?
Yeah. So for me personally, growing up on a small farm, I was always connected to nature, always outside. Mom would have to make me come in for dinner because I was off having the next adventure. And they also taught us, I'm very grateful that every insect, every creature, a snake, there are valuable uses for every animal and a purpose and balance in nature. So nature's been evolving for 4 billion years and it's perfectly in harmony and balance. There is no waste. It's in a stream, you might observe it goes around, it adapts around the obstacles in its way, versus we tend to maybe stop and stress out about them. So if you'll just listen to nature, and that includes animals, The first book was a play on trust your animal instincts because we all have intuition inside. And listening to that is really hard in the freneticism of our day-to-day lives. And so it's about listening to yourself. And for me, because I'm so connected with animals, I would see an animal, repetitively until I figured out what's it saying. Like scorpions, for example, kept getting in the place I was staying in Costa Rica. And I had never even seen one before. I lived in Nashville, Tennessee. We don't have scorpions. And, finally I figured out, oh, you have hardened your heart to the point where no one can get in, with their love, and my love could not get out. And so it's being observant of these lessons that we need in our lives. And so the first book was about that. The theme that carries through to the second book, which is hardcore business, productivity, innovation, profits, but all the answers come from nature, all of them. Like the networks, I use examples of mycelium networks underground, which are fungus, mushroom networks. They're so much further sophisticated than like our most advanced AI. No waste is generated, no electricity. Everything runs on nature and it runs perfectly and seamlessly. So nature's been evolving for a billion years, modern business, maybe 350. So we have a lot we can learn. And it's like putting this on its head of, oh, this poor, pitiful planet, we should save it. And I'm like, no, like we need to be having FOMO. I want every CEO in America to have FOMO that they're going to miss out if they don't pay attention to what the heck nature is trying to teach them right now.
So obviously, like I'm gonna bring my wife into this equation. Like she is a tree hugger. She loves animals, but the big but is the picture which you hold in a tarantula. I think that's where her buck would stop. And I think most people would probably completely freak out. And your statement was everyone has to hold a tarantula at least once in their life.
That's right.
I want you to kind of talk about it because I mean, obviously, we're talking about infusing business with nature, but you're taking it to a whole nother level to where some people they have 10 things on this side that they're willing to do and the one thing they're not willing to do, but you're willing to do everything collectively. How did you get into that personality trait? I mean, obviously, being raised on a farm was part of it, but holding a tarantula is a little bit on the extreme. So I want you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot from my son. He is a glass blowing artist, a purpose-driven artist that focuses on coral restoration and sculptures. I've got a little face you can see in the background. But he grew up and he struggled with feeling like an outsider. He was bullied, and he spent a good deal of his childhood in a wheelchair, recovering from different surgeries on his legs that he had to have. And when he was going through those struggles as kind of a tween, he asked if he could get like a bearded dragon, and then it was a newt, and then it was a snake. And, when I see some of those things, especially a snake, I still get kind of a charge like, oh my gosh. And then I think about what is the value of this creature? What, can they do in society? Like they keep rats and mice, infestations down, and they bring balance to the world. And so through his eyes, and for him, it was about misunderstood animals, just as he was being misunderstood. And it brought me back to that concept that every single thing and every single person has a very powerful purpose. There's so much potential. And if we can focus on igniting our potential rather than our ego, wearing that ego and trying to fit in to what everybody else expects. I call it shoulding, or letting other people should on us. You should be the perfect mom. You should look like this and be skinny and, eat the most healthy food. What do you want? What jazzes you up? What's your unique contribution? It's no less powerful than anybody else's. And don't let money, be an indicator of how powerful your contribution is. And so I learned a lot from my son about those, animals that are often misunderstood or marginalized, or, the first thing people do when they see a snake is want to kill it. And he really educated me that, mom, they're really useful, and, they're very gentle. And, you're like something like 400 times more likely to be killed by a dog than a snake.
So I'm happy you brought up Ethan, right? I mean, so those that don't understand the level of glass blowing that he does. I definitely want you to go check out his Instagram account at Ethan_Glassworks and just check out, like, there's glass blowing and then there's what Ethan is doing. It's to her point, it's on a whole nother level. And it brings us back to that last statement that you made about being, potentially more likely to be killed by a dog. I want you to kind of talk about Sadie for a minute, because I mean, Sadie's not the average German Shepherd in this equation, being that you're an animal lover. She rings doorbells, she's being trained, like, and I think you're feeding off of that energy as well. So I want you to talk about, like, how are you feeding off of something as simple as having your son's dog, which you named your grand fur baby. How does that feed into what you're doing?
Some people have grandkids, and I have a grand fur baby. Yeah, Trent and Ethan, my two kids, could not be any more polar opposite, but they're best friends. And one thing they share is a love of animals. So, yeah, Trent teaches safety training, and he got this dog. She does look like a German Shepherd. She's a Belgian Malinois, and they are just wicked smart. So every time I see them, he's in Wilmington, North Carolina, Ethan's in St. Louis, Missouri, and getting to see them and getting to see his pet, it's amazing. And Ethan has some cats that he rescued from a park. So we're all, tirelessly animal champions.
Hmm. So that is your like your life outside of business, right? And obviously
Right.
inside of business, your education is pretty diverse, right? You have like a finance background, you have like certificates from MIT, you have all these different collective elements. And I think, to your point about being a futurist, they were not by accident. I think that they were staged in a particular fashion to get you to where you are. I want you to talk about, like, the selection of your education and how they've helped you to get to where you are today.
Yeah, and it's interesting with your listeners and how you encourage them to take risks and try different things. And this might resonate with them. Dad told me, like, in college, maybe take some things or focus on something that you don't naturally necessarily love. And so I did. I, picked investments, and I did love math, but technology, did not love, working with computers or programming or any of those things. But what it did was, my personality is more like probably a salesperson or a marketing person, innovation. But it gave me these skills that either I was the only marketing person in the room that understood how to speak the language of technology, or in sustainability, for example, I never put things in the language of, let's be more sustainable, let's do it for the planet. Because I lived in the Southeast, and 40% of the people don't, they don't care about that. It's very polarizing there. So it was always, you already own these homes. I can put another asset on top, solar, and give you a 4% increase on your return rate. So if you put things in the language of the dollar, that was a huge advantage over someone that was, approaching it like, let's, make the air cleaner. Yes, half the population is going to be inspired by that, but the other half is going to be repelled. And if we want to make real change, we have to focus on the things everybody can listen to. In the United States, a lot of times that's the dollar. It's being able to make a living for your family, being safe, having clean air and clean water to drink. Focus on the things everybody needs instead of things that can polarize us.
I think it's so humorous, like the way, like, this is unfolding. And you said something that kind of sparked a memory from doing my due diligence with you. Like, you were part of the world's largest solar power community, which, again, we're talking about futurism. We're talking about all these different things about business. Where does that fit into the equation? Obviously, I think on the nature side, but how did you come up with that conceptual aspect to then say, I'm going to streamline business with nature and help save by creating the world's largest solar community?
Yeah, I think it goes back to, what is the creative economic solution? We're so wired that everything has to fit into a cookie cutter way. I recently went back to work in sustainability for a building company called Gilbane, and they have kind of this like Shark Tank thing where companies can pitch, this is what we're doing. And we heard from some sustainable companies that were emerging. And let's say it's a porta pot or something that you would have on a construction site. And these guys, no chemicals, they're taking the waste and putting it in fertilizer for farmers to use. And so it's this fully sustainable solution. And what we tend to do as organizations is, well, there's a premium there, so I can't pay extra for this job, so we're not going to do it. And the success that I've had, and I encourage your listeners to think, how could we do it? Go back to the stream that's flowing around the rocks, instead of stopping every time there's a rock in the way. How can we adapt to that? And so one of the things that we're discussing is how can we use that premium, not in a traditional venture capital way, but how could you use that to say, okay, well, if we buy this many, we could help you scale, and you could set aside X% of that premium as equity for us. So now I'm not having to go get a commitment to buy into a risky startup company. I'm not having to, disrupt their operations. We can help them scale. So it's this win-win, opportunity. And so I just use that as one example of, in the United States, we often think of, hunt, kill, me, not you. I'm going to be first, right? And instead, how can we all win together? How can we grow each other's organizations? How can we make things better as a whole and have economics as the driver? Because everybody can listen to it if you're talking about making more money.
I'm loving this conversation with you because again, I think everything that you've done and that you are doing are predetermined. Like before you get to that stage, you have that on your roadmap. So for the listener, I want you to kind of talk about your information technology strategy position at Tractor Supply. Now, the average listener may be like, well, what does Tractor Supply have to do with what she's doing at scale? But basically everything you're saying, you're talking about solar, you're talking about nature, you're talking about business, you're talking about suitability. I want you to talk about when did you decide and why did you decide to go into that particular sector, considering there was other opportunities in your roadmap?
Well, that was kind of a very unusual opportunity. They were working with a university there. They're based in Nashville. And a friend of mine was working with the university as well. And she said, you've used AI, big data, looked at energy smart tech and IoT devices, and we're doing a special project with students and Tractor Supply. Would you come and just sit in and, give me some feedback on how you think this might go? And it was a great presentation. Everyone was engaged in the room. And then, come the end of the presentation, everything was almost over. And they said, well, are there any last minute questions? And I raised my hand and I said, how much does it cost? Nobody had thought about that. And again, it goes back to diversity of thought. You had a lot of technical, people in the room. You had a lot of students who were programmers and, also technical minded. And so asking things like, what's the cost? How, is this something that you actually sell a lot of? How does this relate to your highest sold products? And so it was a short-term project that they brought me in to do, to look at their strategy and see, how are we thinking across the board with this type of thing. So it was using a lot of their deep knowledge. They had a lot of experts working at Tractor Supply and technology, and bringing them together and seeing, do you need a mix of this on your team, or that, and collecting their information to put together the strategy and roadmap.
So obviously, I think on your intellectual side, you found opportunities to keep yourself challenged over and time again. So again, like the polar balance of that is a keyword that you've used before, is like your happy habits. So I mean, that's obviously doing your season climb in Diamond Lake, also doing a hike in Roosevelt National Forest. You climb Gray's Peak. And in addition to that, you've also extended that to the generation before you. You've taken your mom on some of these trips as well. So how has that also influence your family outcome, your family dynamic, being that you're so infused to the future, but you're so in tune with nature?
Yeah, I'm glad that you bring up family, because I spent a lot of time in my life really focusing on kind of the masculine side of my family, the Scots. The Scots got kicked out of Scotland at the Jacobite Rebellion. They were always, the fighters. And so I was born with this. I look like my dad. I, have that kind of competitive spark and fight. And I spent so much time in that throughout my life until about 2016, where burnout got to the peak. And then after spending time, in the jungle, away from things, going back and looking at work in a completely different way without the ego into it, I've really embraced the learnings from my mom's side of the family. And, what are those traits like listening and empathy and compassion and team building and observing, the wisdom around you, being in the current, right? Because I was always thinking ahead, what's next? What's next? And that's kind of how I'm wired. But yet the value is in the current, and whether the current is the heartbeat inside of you, your intuition, whether it's the power in an organization, whether it's tapping into your energy, or it's the present, which quantum science says that's all there is the present, and really observing it around us. So in recent years, really trying to embrace more of those values from her side of the family. And it's been really rewarding.
I think that that's another really solid segue because I mean, obviously, the reward that you learned from your mom, you've also delegated that to prime example with Ethan. I think you guys did a volunteering event in Key, Florida. It
Key
was
Largo,
yeah.
yeah.
So I want you to kind of like talk about like how like obviously you're doing suitability, you're helping businesses, you're working and you're getting paid for it, but you're also willing to give back. How much does that really play into what you're doing at scale? And are you then influencing businesses to also give back as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And Ethan and I love to go dive, and we help harvest coral, the Coral Restoration Foundation, and then plant it. And he has donated his artwork each year for the last few years to their fundraisers to try and raise funds for coral restoration. It's yet another aspect that he really drew my attention to, of how important the coral reefs are. I didn't really think about it because it's below the surface, right? And I was always in a landlocked state, but just the importance and protection they give from hurricanes, and the life that they support in the oceans is so critical. So it's something that I love to do and love doing with Ethan, and with my kids. How that carries through to business, that's one of the reasons I went back into corporate life. I always swore I'm never going to go back to work for a big company again. I'm ready to just work with smaller companies and help them grow. But Gilbane is a privately held organization that cares deeply about their commitment to carbon reduction, waste, and water reduction. And they're like these cowboys that said, we're going to take this $7 billion company and commit it to net zero carbon 10 years before the UN recommends it. And yet they haven't even started, doing that work yet. And they were looking for somebody to figure out, how do we go from not measuring our impact all the way to net zero? And they have these pockets. They have like 25 net zero buildings. They build life science buildings and, large facilities. And so they're doing the practices, but getting that organized. And I'm just wildly excited about the opportunity to work with a company that is privately held and not trying to force a return just for, stock market for that one quarter that doesn't make sense. And so they're very sustainable minded. And I'm really excited to put to practice the things that I have empowering change. What is the growth cycle? Where are they headed with this? How do we organize this? How do we create momentum and connect all of the different aspects? If you do a good job in something like sustainability or innovation, you work yourself out of a job, because it's a mindset and a culture throughout. So I'm excited about bringing that over to work. And that's how I've brought in, I've kind of had this work life crossover for the last 20 years, and it's been great.
I think it's definitely very, very, very interesting because I mean, obviously, we're talking about your intellectual side, we're talking about your business side, but there's also a daredevil aspect to you as well, right? And obviously, you may think hiking is something that people just do for cardio conditioning, and I think like your health is well in the right direction. But I want you to talk about like taking the risk. Prime example. If I remember correctly, you were doing a handstand on a rope bridge back in August of 21, right? That little image of you doing that handstand, I want you to kind of talk about like why does taking risk and understanding the rewards with risk, how does that play into what you do with your clients?
I think that is so important, taking risks. And that was a picture of me on a bridge in Arenal. They have this amazing park, and I think it has 13 different hanging suspended bridges up in the forest canopy. It's just amazing. And while I was down there living for 3 months, I really was practicing a lot of yoga, and I'm upside down, and my life was upside down. And, literally and figuratively, found myself in that state. And one of the things that I talk about in the first book is, these lessons from animals. Little bats would come and hang near me during the day when I was upside down and doing yoga. And I thought, what is the lesson from these guys? And what I took away from them over time was that, bats can't fly from the ground like other birds. They can't take off. It's impossible. What they have to do is hang and then risk dropping to their death in order to reach where they need to go. And so, like us, I had always played it safe when it came to my personal life, my career. It felt great to take risks, but I tried to fit in with what everybody else wanted, that perfect life, that perfect marriage, be the perfect mom, and we can't be perfect, none of us. So letting go of that and just taking the risks to be me, to embrace, the person that loves adventure and exploring. So that was why I was upside down on the bridge, walking across with my hands.
So I think obviously we named you the suitability boss in the beginning, right? And then obviously we're talking about a lot of diversity as you as an individual. But if you can kind of simmer this down to just using 3 to 5 words to articulate who you are and what you represent, what would those 3 to 5 words be?
If I had to boil it down to 3 to 5 words, well, I would say explorer. That goes along with the themes we've been talking about. I would say kind of a hero. I love helping others. Like I'm just wired to help people, and setting aside that ego, has been a really important part since 2016. I would say lover. I love people. I love animals. We have an endless, boundless capacity for love. And so sharing that with other people and letting others know, I love you. You might hate me. You could send me, ugly mail or once, and this, you've got a very successful podcast. You always get the haters and you get the trolls, and then, you get the supporters, and loving the trolls as much as you love the supporters and practicing that. So I would say that as one of them. And then change agent. I love watching how people change. I love how people move, what gets us to change our behavior. And so I've done a lot of consulting around that. And it's fun for me to help other people be able to accept change and not fear it, to ride the wave, instead of being drowned by it.
I think it's definitely fascinating. You're talking about change and it kind of thinking about your beginning days as far as being on a farm. And if you ever seen the movie Interstellar, Interstellar is a movie about space and time
Yes.
travel and everything, but the original scenes are on a farm. So I
Yeah.
want you to kind of like talk about the early days. I mean, was that farm more so the instinct to where you became an entrepreneur, or was it more so things that you learned about suitability and staying in like and actually sustaining what you're doing? Like which one did you fall in that spectrum in your early days?
Yeah, I think it was all about the early days because of the discovery element. We didn't have, a great deal of money. If we wanted something, then, I would muck my sister's stalls and earn up, her allowance, or, save up and buy it yourself. And so you get this ethic of, if I set a goal, if I work hard enough, deliver newspapers, or, sell Christmas cards, what are some of the other things I did? Mow lawns, whatever you can do. And it gave us that enterprising, space to be a tiny little entrepreneur. And, I sold like 200 boxes of Christmas cards to buy a tent, and then I could sleep outside, and camp out with my friends. So I think it's about practicing different things. And we had such a gift of having that space. So while, again, we didn't have money, we learned techniques. Dad used to say, we can eat out on Sunday if our electricity bill goes down, this month. So little incentives and rewards for thinking frugally, and also thinking about the balance of everything. So for me personally, I think those adventures with my friends. I mean, I had 4 horses, 3 cats, 2 dogs, 6 chickens, 2 ducks, and an older sister. So that was a lot to play with, out there. And a lot of it was creative play, making up adventures in your mind. And isn't that what business is? It's making up adventures in your mind about what you can do and then making it happen.
100%, 100%. But let's play devil's advocate with that, right? Now, obviously, I think your early days, you would not change anything, but on your business journey, a lot of it was prerequisites and you kind of set up and then you established and conquered. Is there anything on that time map that if you can go back to and make a slight little change? Just say you have a 5 minute window to talk to your younger self, going back to Interstellar, you're behind the wall and you're doing Morse code. What message would you send to your younger self to kind of help you become who you are a lot faster?
Oh, goodness, that's a great one. I think it would, for my younger self, like in high school or what have you, I think I would have tried to care more about opportunities to be an exchange student or things like that. But I was so in the framework of, well, this is what you do. You play sports. You do that. If you're doing that, you can't play sports this year. Or you can't be, on the squad. And so I let things that in the big picture of life don't matter so much matter. And then as I got older, I think I would tell myself it's okay to let them see you sweat. It's okay to be vulnerable. Being usually the only female at the table in many cases, you tend to over emphasize that you can't be weak. You have to over prepare. You have to overwork. And I think my kids did not get enough mom time because I was trying so hard to be perfect. And none of us are perfect. Just give yourself a little bit of grace and love those babies, while they're young.
I think that's another hell of a segue to kind of think about if a listener's listening right now, she could be a female, she could be an executive. And to your point about what you would go back and change, I want you to kind of convert that into words of wisdom for an individual that is hell bent on climbing up that corporate ladder at all costs. And to your point, the cost of their children to a certain extent. What words of insight would you help them to not only climb that ladder, but also juggle a balanced family life?
Yeah, I would say what really speaks to you? What is your strength? If your strength is uh, making those meals, organizing for those kids, don't be afraid to take the time and do more of that. And a lot of business places today have flexibility that they didn't have in the past. So I think taking advantage of that, talking to your boss, talking to them about a flex schedule, find ways that you can fit that in when you can. And on the other hand, no judgment to people. I have so many friends who have decided not to have children, to focus on their career because that's what jazzes them up. And you go, do that. Don't feel obligated, to fit into a cookie cutter, way that things used to be in the 1950s. You be who you are, whatever that is, and sit into it, and you'll be happier for it. And you'll be more productive and innovative for it. It always goes back to the more energized you are, then the more successful you will be. And success is not always measured by the dollar.
I think it's definitely a fascinating thing. So I'm gonna do it on the other side. I'm gonna ask you a question based upon what you said. Now, if an individual decides not to have kids and they're going for that corporate ladder and they're entrepreneur and they're growing the business and they're having all these different successes, the unfortunate side effect of that is time. That
Mhm.
eventually that business would have to go to someone else. Eventually they would die, which leads me to legacy. So why
Mhm.
would they do that and not think about the legacy? So for that individual, I want you to think about answering that question for them indirectly to talk about what would that legacy look like for them if they don't have kids.
Yeah, I think the legacy is really important. And that's why you're thinking as you're doing your role, how is this role, how is my contribution affecting the next generation? How is it impacting the world today? And sometimes I've mentioned Ethan a couple of times because I learned so much from him and what he goes through. He's a starving artist. There's so many starving artists that can't make enough to pay their rent. And I just say, do you know how many people you have touched? You have 300,000 followers on your TikTok and you've created interest. You've sparked an interest in something they may never have been exposed to. So you may not make money doing this. You may have to find a different job. Those things will happen, but look at your contribution. And that's the legacy that goes behind. Maybe those 300,000 people know don't wear sunscreen that's not reef safe. He always says just one tip. He'll give them one tip that they can do. And that's how people change is just give them one thing at a time and show them how powerful that one little change can be when you add it up. So I don't think it's for us to judge how other people adopt our legacy in our work. It's for us to focus on what are we called to speak about? What are we called to say in this lifetime? And leave it. That's the hardest thing, isn't it? We can't control other people, how they change, how they adopt it. But if we say what we need to say and love what we need to love, then that is success.
So going into that, I mean, obviously there's different levels of success. And if you're passing on that legacy, I think it comes back to documentation, right? Documenting that journey. And I think a great way of documenting things today would be books. You've written 2 books, and obviously you're well versed and you're well educated. What books would you like to recommend for a listener that is striving to achieve more, but to your point, they want to be balanced. They want to have, suitability. They want to be earth conscious. They don't not necessarily want to be tree huggers, but they want to embrace that.
Yeah, so there are so many different books from a behavioral standpoint. I love Malcolm Gladwell's work. The Tipping Point was highly inspirational for me, how you can create social change. And it gives a lot of really good examples. I also love Made to Stick. Um, there are so many books about the environment, and Ray Anderson, who was on the Presidential Climate Action Committee with me, he is the most wonderful legacy for interface carpets. And he talks about owning this very successful business and waking up one day and saying, what is this legacy I'm leaving behind? I am, the worst example through this company of pollution and making things worse, and how he turns it around and becomes even more profitable, and not just net zero carbon, but regenerative. So the carpet now even takes in carbon out of the environment. And so Ray Anderson's work, and he's since passed on from this world, but it's very inspirational. What I learned over the years, though, is you can train yourself up in a skill, any skill, but if you don't get people to change and listen to your ideas, if you don't understand how to speak in their language or get them, to buy into it, then it doesn't matter. It just dies on the vine. And so that's why, like Malcolm Gladwell's work, books about how to change behavior are really important for any leader. If you're looking for CEU classes or, just brushing up on something, I really recommend behavior change, because it will help you get your ideas into the world in a way that people can hear them. It's not about manipulation. It's about understanding that people are overwhelmed with too many choices. If there's more than 6 choices, they freeze. So understanding how to help guide them where they want to go.
I'm so happy you brought up the tipping point. I mean, that really puts us to where we are right now. I would
Yeah.
think the only time that I would like to be more alive is in the future. Now, I
Yeah.
appreciate the past. I understand the past. So I want to ask you that question. I mean, considering that you read the tipping point and you could have been born in any era, you could have been born 100 years ago, you could have been born 100 years from now. You are born now and you're optimizing, doing things based upon technology today. Is there another time frame that you would ideally like to be born in?
I think my focus in this lifetime is on the current. And, it's that word and the so many meanings has been prolific throughout my life. And so I don't think there's any other time I would rather be here. I think in this perfect storm of polarity, where people are being more and more polarized and people don't know what's true anymore, when people are getting away from nature and businesses are getting away from, they're viewing nature as a resource to use up versus a resource to build their roadmap. And so I think my voice was put here at this time for a reason and with this message for a reason. And so it would be right now, the current.
I think it's great because I mean, obviously, you're a speaker. That's one of the services that you deliver, and just hearing how elegant you speak and what you're delivering, and the chemistry between futurism and nature is something that most individuals that speak don't have that well balanced. So I want you to kind of talk to the listener to how do they get in contact with you? How does someone hire you to help you inspire their employees or their executives to understand what we're talking about as far as suitability and as far as nature all being collective as one unit?
Yeah, I love working with groups or talking to them inspirationally about how can you avoid burnout in your organization? How can you recharge your life? How can you find a team that thinks differently, and performs better because of it? And so you can head on over to Tabitha A. Scott, and that's Tabitha A. Scott, and .com. It has information about, keynotes and things that I talk about. But for me, it's about sharing this message of hope and this message of empathy and love and bringing balance back. If you're out of balance, you can't flow as fast. You can't get things done as fast. And I think business has marginalized these feminine attributes, not feminine from female, feminine in the sense of compassion, listening, love, empathy. And now they realize that, oh my gosh, the power is there. Like we can unleash our burnout workforce if we embrace some of these attributes. We can use our resources, and that includes not just natural resources, but human resources and financial resources more wisely. So I think flipping some of these paradigms on their head are really important. And I love helping groups with that.
Oh, wow. Very positive. I mean, obviously, I think that you're a hell of a positive individual, not just based upon the topics, but also delivering the results. And at the same time, you're walking the walk and you're hiking the hikes, right? So I want you to kind of pull this together and I want you to talk about technology. I mean, obviously, you have a certificate from MIT, and that particular certificate was more so about blockchain, which is related to AI and everything else. I want you to talk about like the tools that you use on a day to day that if they didn't exist today, you would not be able to achieve the level of success that you have without those particular programs.
Yeah, I think for me and the level of success has been about dissemination of information, and a lot of that goes back to just social media or, how can I reach people in a positive way where they are today? And so I think it's about the communication channels that are already there. AI plays a bit of a role into that by helping connect if you do your hashtag or, if you're posting in a certain way, then it will bring people that are more likely to resonate with your message. And to that, the blockchain, the crypto, those certifications I got while I was working with Tractor Supply and looking into the future to see, how's this going to play into retail? How's this going to play into companies that are that size, Fortune 400 organizations. And I think a lot of them are just not there yet. If you're not a tech company, a lot of it's not day to day applicable yet. And so it's a wait and see approach. And also, the more I learned about blockchain and how energy intensive it is, and how we can't keep up with the data storage, we can't keep up with the electricity need. It's a slow process. The more I kind of wanted to pitch hit against it, because we're smart, we're innovative, we could do more, we could do better. So how do we evolve it? That's what I'm interested in. What are those solutions that don't produce waste, that don't produce emissions? How can we take something that's left over here and turn it into something new over here instead of sticking it in the landfill?
So, kind of going back on the sci-fi that's obviously becoming a reality in our world, to your point, once quantum computing comes out, then we'll be able to catch up to the surplus and demand, right? But I
That's
want
right.
to think about it from the standpoint with this next question. Let's say quantum computing is there, right? Let's say AI is there, and you have an opportunity to allow AI to recreate anyone throughout history. And you get to spend 24 hours with that individual, whether they're dead or alive, it doesn't matter because AI is going to create them and the image of them and all the essence of who that person is. Who would that person be? and why would you like to spend a 24-hour window with them?
Wow. That's a very loaded question. It would be between probably Gandhi or Christ. And the reason is I think they were just such brilliant communicators. And looking at, like, take Christ, for example. We talk about being fishers of men and things like that, but he was a brilliant social change agent. He did it peacefully, as Gandhi, MLK, so many in history have done. But, getting fishermen, they spoke 3 to 4 languages because they were traders. So he was very smart about this network, pre-networking in internet days. He was using people that spoke multiple language to accelerate the message. And it was this grassroots movement. And the same with Gandhi, the same with MLK. Nothing in nature grows from the top down, right? Everything grows from the bottom up. And so if we look at these very successful movements in our lifetime and these change makers, they're growing organically from the bottom up, and they're finding a way to reach people where they are and listening to their pain and listening to, their desires and their hope and their wishes. And so, gosh, it would be hard to pick one.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fascinating. I mean, kind of thinking about Gandhi and his quote about an eye for an eye will make the world go blind. When he said it
Mhm.
to where we are right now, that quote is still so profound, and it's probably going to be profound for a long period of time. Because I mean, like, world peace is not the 100% reality of where it can be as of yet.
Yeah.
So I think going with that individual will definitely be insightful for sure. So I think like this episode is definitely an impactful episode. I know we have a hard stop. So going into closing, what I like to do is whoever I'm interviewing, I like to give them an opportunity to become the host of the Boss Cage podcast. So I'm now your guest. You're now the host. Do you have any questions for me?
Of course I do. I want to know what your idea of powering change is. How would you advise people to take about change, to, get out of where they've been in the past? And I mean, your podcast is about taking risks, about, driving to the next level. So what is the secret sauce in your mind for powering change?
For me, I would say it kind of stems back to, cliche, but the children are our future, right?
Mhm.
So if you're going to then necessarily influence your kids, and what I've learned about kids, and I've had opportunity to my son is about to be 18, our daughter's 18, and just seeing them grow up over the years, they love you, they'll listen to you, they'll stop listening, they'll rebel, they'll hate you, and then the cycle starts back over again.
That's right.
So it's kind of like if you stick to that, whatever it is you're sticking to, for example, for me, it's creating this content, creating this media, because I know sooner or later, our kids may not dive into media. They may not dive into anything that I'm building right now, but the things that I'm building right now, 10 years from now, would be able to help them overcome whatever circumstances they're going to be dealing with. Our daughter may listen to this episode 5 years from now and hear who you are and what you're doing and be completely influenced by that particular episode 10 years down the road. So I'm not doing it for now. I'm doing it for the grandkids, the great grandkids, your great grandkids. It get to the point to where even your your favorite dog may be able to even listen to content as well, right? That's what I'm talking about. It's like thinking about the future and making the content
That's right.
evergreen so it'll live forever.
And I love that because you're not only changing lives, but you're leaving a legacy along the way. And that's what we were talking about earlier. How can you leave a legacy? It doesn't have to be something special and focused that I'm going to go plant a tree today as my legacy. This is a legacy. You're creating this content that's going to live forever, and people are going to find it and they're going to be inspired by it. And they're going to know that you took the time and the heart and the brain capacity to make it happen. So that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely appreciate it. So, do you have any other questions, or is that it?
Could you tell me more about those things behind your head on the wall?
Yeah. So collectively, my original degree was graphic design, and jumping into media, one thing that I've learned about media personalities is that they have great creativity, but the creativity is in the medium that they're in. And because my
Yeah.
first degree was more of visual media, I tried to transverse between the two. So like the book bags behind me are illustrations of my graffiti days when, I take vacation and I have opportunity to have some downtime, and I'll draw a sketch. And then I'm like, okay, this sketch is great, Now what do I do with it? How do I then
Yeah.
take the sketch and convert it into the medium that I'm in right now? So we have a bunch of merch. We have sneakers, shoes, hats, hoodies, book bags that are all creations from my digital visual creation side, bridging the gap between that and being more of a media podcaster.
I love that. I love that so much. And looking at different ways of art, it's interesting how people like you and Ethan can think of things. Like one day he was saying, how do you get messages across to society? Wouldn't it be cool if everybody walked in a path and created a message, over time, and you have this meaning of, yes, I've been in your shoes, and maybe it's, a peace symbol, or maybe it's, a love, love your enemy kind of thing. But whatever message you have, instead of defacing buildings or whatever, how can you get people involved, and create? I think artists just see the world in a different way, and it's powerful and it's cool.
Yeah, I always say we hear voices, and it's not voices that we listen to, it's voices that we have conversations with. And
Yes.
that's how we come up with these different creations. So I think this episode was definitely an episode to where I think you and I could probably talk for hours upon hours of so many
Good.
different things. And like I would love to dive into like your world travels and what did you get from each location. But again, we have a hard stop. So with that, is there anything last that you'd like to say to our audience in closing?
No, I would like to say thanks for listening. And I want to thank you for having me as a guest and for inspiring people everywhere to follow their dreams and make it happen. So thank you for what you're doing and the good you're bringing into the world. Rock
Great,
on.
great. Well, with that, SA Grant, over and out.